Before climate change became political, it was scientific. Before it became loud and controversial, it was actually really quiet. My name is Christine Jorgensen. I'm a scientist, and I've worked in science communications for almost 10 years. One of the most important things I've learnt is that public mistrust in climate science, it didn't happen because people suddenly stopped believing in evidence. It happened because trust was intentionally disrupted. Now, to understand that, we need to go back to the very beginning. The idea that the Earth's atmosphere could trap heat, it isn't new. In the early 1800s, French scientist Joseph Fourier first proposed that the atmosphere acts like insulation, keeping the planet warmer than it otherwise would be. Later in the mid-1800s, John Tyndall identified that there's specific gases, including carbon dioxide, that actually trap heat. And then in the end of the 19th century, Svante Arrhenius went further. He calculated that increasing carbon dioxide levels from burning fossil fuels could raise global temperatures. Now, this wasn't activism. It wasn't politics. It was physics, and at the time, it wasn't controversial. Earth has always been very good at managing heat. In fact, you could say Earth is the ultimate temperature regulator. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. A kind of planetary Goldilocks, if you will. And for most of its history, it's done this balancing act quietly, without drama, without intervention, and certainly without humans. Every day, energy from the sun travels across space and reaches Earth. Some of that energy bounces straight back out into space. Think of it as Earth saying, no thanks, we're good. Ice caps, clouds, and bright surfaces help with this reflection. But not all sunlight leaves so easily. Some of that energy is absorbed by oceans, forests, soil, and the atmosphere. And this is where the greenhouse gas effect enters the story. Often misunderstood, often blamed, but actually essential. See, greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane, they act like a thermal blanket. They slow the escape of heat back into space, keeping Earth warm enough for life. Without them, the planet would probably be a frozen rock. With them, we get oceans that don't freeze solid, forests that grow, and ecosystems that thrive. So let's be clear. The greenhouse effect is not the villain. It's actually the reason why we're here. For thousands of years, for millions of years, this system evolved slowly. Carbon moved between the atmosphere, oceans, plants, and soil in long, steady cycles. Forests absorbed carbon, oceans stored heat, ice reflected sunlight, the planet adjusted gradually like a thermostat gently clicking up or down. Earth had time. Then, humans discovered fossil fuels. Coal, oil, and gas were essentially ancient sunlight, carbon that had been stored underground for millions of years. When we burned them, we released that carbon back into the atmosphere, not slowly, not gently, all at once. This is where the story changes. The problem was never that Earth stores heat. The problem was how fast we changed the rules. With industrialization, carbon was released faster than forests could absorb, faster than oceans could safely store it, faster than natural systems could adapt. The planetary thermostat didn't just tick upward, it jumped. Imagine turning your oven from warm to maximum in seconds and expecting nothing to burn. Earth kept doing what it always does, storing heat. But now it was storing more of it and storing it faster. Oceans absorbed the majority of this heat, warming from the surface down. Ice began to melt, reducing Earth's reflective surfaces and causing even more heat to be absorbed, a feedback loop that scientists describe calmly, even though it's really anything but calm. By the mid-20th century, scientists weren't guessing anymore. They were measuring carbon dioxide levels, oceans' temperatures, atmospheric changes. The data was clear. The balance was shifting. Not because Earth's system was broken, but because it was being overwhelmed. Earth's heat system never failed us. We overloaded it, and understanding that, really understanding it, matters, because climate change isn't about a planet that suddenly stopped working. It's about a system that did exactly what it was designed to do, just under conditions it was never meant to handle. In other words, folks, Earth didn't lose control. We just turned up the heat. What's important to understand is this. Early climate science wasn't rejected. It was actually discussed quietly in academic journals and in research institutions. In fact, governments even funded early climate science research. There was no political debate, there was no culture war, there was no denial movement. So what changed? Well, by the 1970s and 80s, climate science began pointing clearly toward fossil fuel combustion as the cause of warming. And this is when knowledge became dangerous. Fossil fuel companies understood the implications before the public did. In fact, internal documents show they knew the risks, and they just chose to protect profit instead. Instead of disputing the science, though, they disputed certainty. Think tanks were funded, doubt was amplified, and uncertainty became the message. Now, the public were rarely told outright that climate change was false. That claim would have been way too easy to challenge. Instead, they were told something far more effective. Scientists disagree. This message appeared again and again in newspapers, television segments, and in political speeches, particularly across the global north. See, climate science was being framed as an ongoing debate rather than a growing consensus. In media coverage, climate scientists were frequently positioned alongside non-experts, industry representatives, or commentators with no scientific background. What mattered was not expertise, but balance. Balance replaced accuracy. Now, this framing gave the impression that science was unsettled, even as evidence continued to accumulate. Uncertainty was emphasized, while agreement was downplayed. Importantly, this uncertainty did not emerge naturally from the science itself. It was carefully cultivated. Fossil fuel companies and allied political groups funded think tanks, advocacy organizations, and public relation campaigns designed to cast doubt on climate research. Internal documents later revealed that these actors understood the science, but chose to challenge public trust in it. Their goal was not to disprove climate change, but to delay action by keeping the public unsure. This strategy was especially effective because it aligned with existing media norms where controversy and opposing viewpoints are valued. In treating climate change as a debate, media systems were able to amplify doubt while silencing the consensus. This was not a failure of public understanding. It was actually a calculated disruption of trust, and it worked, shaping decades of climate learning, public hesitation, and political inaction that continue to influence climate discourse today. Now, this is where global inequality in climate learning becomes impossible to ignore. In the global north, climate change has largely been learnt as an abstract problem. Knowledge has been communicated through graphs, models, reports, and projections, often focused on future risks rather than present realities. Learning is mediated through scientific institutions, formal education systems, and digital platforms where climate change is debated, analysed, and sometimes contested. For many people, climate knowledge exists at a distance, separated from everyday life. Whereas in much of the global south, learning has taken a very different form. Climate change is not something encountered through data alone, but rather through lived experience. Droughts disrupting farmers, floods destroying homes, rising seas threatening coastal communities, wildfires impacting wildlife. Environmental change is felt in bodies, livelihoods, and the relationships to land. Yet, despite the depth and urgency, this experiential knowledge has rarely been treated as authoritative within global climate discourse. It's actually often labelled as local or contextual, while scientific knowledge produced in the global north is framed as global and universal. This distinction is not about accuracy or value, it's actually about power. Global knowledge systems privilege scientific frameworks, English language communication, and institutions that are based in the global north. As a result, ways of knowing grounded in place culture and survival are marginalised, not because they lack insight, but because they challenge dominant definitions of expertise. Understanding these unequal learning realities is essential for building more just forms of climate knowledge and action. This is why climate learning looks the way it does today. Mistrust didn't emerge naturally, it was built. And understanding that helps us see climate movements, especially in the global south, not as emotional reactions, but as legitimate learning spaces shaped by survival and resistance. Now the question is, if climate mistrust was manufactured, what responsibility do we have to dismantle it? And whose knowledge might we need to take seriously for the first time?